Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Critical Perspectives. I'm here with Vanessa, and as always, we have been slammed with so much going on in the world. And I know we tell you this every time, but things keep just getting worse and worse and worse in terms of everything going on literally in every corner of the world. And we're going to go through various regions in West Asia and also, of course, in Latin America. This is where I think we can combine the the occurrences happening between wars and takeovers, and especially related, of course, to Washington and Israel and how they are expanding into Latin America and the various nefarious alliances also happening and new deals, quote unquote, being made in West Asia. So I do want to start off with Vanessa's side in West Asia and in Lebanon in particular, because a lot of people, and I don't know if we fully got to talk about this, Vanessa, have been cheerleading the MOU between Iran and the United States, and that's clearly already been not kept. The demands haven't been respected by the United States or Israel. We knew that going into this. We talked about how a lot of people were praising it, were saying that the United States was humiliated, and in a way they were, but at the same time, that also, this is not the end of any war. This is a continuous long war. There are many battles, there are many different things happening, and people need to look into things a little bit deeper rather than just, look at this in a very simplistic, oh, win lose and good bad, and just very very juvenile and childish type of cheerleading that we see online, that's pushed as geopolitical analysis. And that's, in regards to Iran and the United States, which we have seen the United States attack Iran and Iran retaliate as well. And again, this was never something that I think we thought was just going to stop with the MOU. It's non-binding, as we've talked about. But also now with Lebanon, the United States and Israel have come to some sort of agreement, some sort of framework that to me looks just specifically set out to push out Iran, to push out the resistance and Hezbollah. And basically this gives Israel the green light to come in to all of Lebanon. And we know that we have seen the protests, we have seen people resist this agreement. This is really putting a magnifying glass on how weak the government is and how they're selling out the country essentially to the Zionists. And I want to hear more from you about what's happening on the ground with that, because I think we know, the differences between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah and but in the background of everything happening with Iran, one of the things that Iran did was attack Israel on behalf of Lebanon. And this isn't over. This is far from over. This is just another sector. And you can also bring in Syria into this and how that's going to play into and everything that you've written since on Jelani and those movements over there.
Well, I think, first of all, let's start with the Iranian-US MOU. And, it caused some controversy online that Lebanon featured so highly in the MOU. I think they were mentioned 3 times in the final MOU. And what Iran actually did was to give the state of Lebanon a position of strength. And the fact that Trump outwardly agreed to Iran being part of the deconfliction operation in Lebanon was extraordinary, and obviously to some degree a slap in the face of Israel at that point. Although I obviously, and I know you don't, we don't subscribe to the idea that there's any rift at any point between Trump and Netanyahu or between the US and Israel. So effectively, what happened from that point, there was a very shaky ceasefire. Of course, Israel has continued to violate that on a daily basis. Today, just before we started speaking, I checked, and there are reports of Israeli warplanes flying at low altitude over southern Lebanon, returning displaced people, more than 1.2 million people, Lebanese, that were displaced from the south to Beirut, particularly to the suburbs of Dahe, have been returning and have been fired upon by the Zionist forces. There are ongoing battles for strategic points, particularly close to the border with Syria. So when we talk about a ceasefire, it's really not a ceasefire. The Israelis have been putting out statements saying that effectively they're not going to abandon the buffer zone, which has now extended to around 10 kilometers and has also encroached on territory north of the Litani River. So therefore, again, close to the border with Syria and the main border crossing with Syria. And then the Lebanese state, or elements within the Lebanese regime, who have been stabbing Hezbollah and the resistance supporters in the back for some time now. President Aoun and Nawaf Salam, who's very much backed by Saudi Arabia, the prime minister, and who also has been visiting Jolani, or Ahmed al-Sharar, as he is now known after his MI6 rebranding, who's the quisling ruler of Syria, working on behalf of Washington, Tel Aviv, to some degree Ankara, and MI6. And so now we've seen this updated MOU, which was released, I think it was early last night, which is just appalling. I mean, it effectively erodes Lebanese sovereignty. It's handing power over to the Zionists and to Washington as if they're going to be fair in meting out justice in Lebanon. The wording of the MOU is extraordinary. While the Lebanese government is making all sorts of concessions, the disarmament of Hezbollah, the redeployment of the Lebanese armed forces into areas where the conflict has been at its hottest between Israel and Hezbollah. Basically, there is no demand for Israel to withdraw, which was part of the MOU between Iran and the United States. There was a 60-day window in which Israel was supposed to fully withdraw from South Lebanon. Now, under this MOU, Israel can redeploy. That's the wording. So the wording is not even withdrawal, it's redeploy. So Israel can redeploy to points where it feels it needs to remain in occupation in order to defend itself until Hezbollah is fully disarmed. At the same time, when Trump is talking about investment through allied countries, so we know what that means. That means the Zionist Arab nations on the Persian Gulf, particularly UAE, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The funding for reconstruction is not going to be given to the resistance and their communities. So we're talking here something like 40 to 50% of the population, which is now being completely disenfranchised, described as a proxy of Iran and occupying Lebanese territory when it is literally their territory. What they're now talking about, and this is a very important change in the terminology, they're now saying only the Lebanese state has the right to defend Lebanon. No other organization within Lebanon has the right to self-defense or even defense of the country. So that is immediately disenfranchising the resistance. And as I said, 40 to 50% of the Lebanese population, when you take into account their supporters within other sectors of Lebanese society. At the same time as that is being said, we know that Trump has made the suggestion back in early May and more recently that maybe they should send Syria to finish the job of disarming and disbanding and destroying Hezbollah and the resistance in Lebanon. At the same time, 3 days ago, Jolani did an interview in Syria in which he made the point, no, Syria is not looking to start a war anywhere, etc. But the wording was very important. And we have to remember it's not Jolani's words. These are the words that are being given to him by his MI6 handlers in the presidential palace in Damascus. He basically said, no, I think Syria has an important role to play in protecting the Lebanese state and the Lebanese institutions. So now when you look at the MOU, you can see how that plays out, right? So what does that mean? That means Jolani has the pretext to intervene in Lebanon to defend the Lebanese state and the Lebanese institutions that are effectively betraying the Lebanese resistance and the population that is affiliated or within resistance communities. So now we have a situation. I don't know if you want to say anything at that point, because I'll go on to how Jolani has been building up forces in Syria for this purpose, basically.
No, I mean, I think you should go on, but I will say that I think this should have been, I think, obvious for anybody that sees how the United States and MI6 deal with how they strategically and tactfully plan to isolate, plan to incite, plan to create divisions within countries. And I'll touch on how that is also being done in Latin America. But you can see even within the state of Lebanon, trying to pit the population, divide the population as being, part of Hezbollah, the problem, or part of the solution with the aid and the rescue and the mediation by the United States. It's laughable to think of the United States as mediators, but again, this is part of the strategy that is used time and time again, as we saw in Syria. We're seeing it in Lebanon, and we're seeing it now actually throughout Latin America as well. So please continue.
And also I think it's important to say that after the MOU was released, of course, there were mass protests on the streets, particularly in the southern suburbs of Beirut, which were very brutally dealt with by the Lebanese armed forces. There have also been independent reports of the US effectively creating an ICE agency, I'm sure with Palantir's help, inside Lebanon, actually designating certain elements within the Lebanese armed forces as special forces, designated as the force to be used against Hezbollah. And of course, they will be given the help necessary to carry out the job. My suspicion on that, because I'm not convinced that there are that many elements within the Lebanese armed forces that would actually turn against their own people, I could be wrong, is that what they're actually going to do, which of course I also suspect they've done elsewhere, is to bring in special agents, mask them up, put them in the uniform and put them out on the streets to try and hunt down Hezbollah operatives and so on, right? So that's another aspect to this as well, where the US is effectively creating a proxy force to deal with Hezbollah internally. But also Israeli commentary today is very clear that, they're literally rubbing their hands in glee because civil strife is what serves them also. And Hezbollah has traditionally been very strong on actually telling their people, no, don't go out on the streets. Don't enter into the civil strife scenario, because that's basically what the enemy wants. But to some degree, they're being pushed to such an extent where really they're being so stabbed in the back and betrayed and marginalized that it's very difficult to see how else that level of frustration and pressure building up is going to explode at some point, right? And then if we basically come to Syria and what has been happening and what I've been writing about for the last few weeks is, according to sources on the ground, Jolani has built up what is obviously a strike force from the north of the border with Lebanon along the eastern border with Lebanon, around 70,000 troops, among which there are Turkish intelligence proxies or leadership of divisions within Jolani's kind of foreign mercenary army, because there's Uzbeks, Chechens, Uyghurs, and they have gathered along that eastern border. They've established surveillance and radar points in the high areas of that border in the Kalamun Mountains, for example. And now we know that there are Ukrainian forces gathering in West Aleppo and south of Tartus. So to the north, close to Idlib, and in the coastal region, which of course is going to put pressure on the Russian presence there also. At the same time, there is a jostling for influence and dominance within those armed groups, of course. And we've seen the assassination of the leading spiritual leader, if you can say spiritual in those terms, of Al-Qaeda, Haras al-Din, which are the main opposition to Jolani, but who are managed by Turkish intelligence. And Sami al-Oraidi, who's the ideologue, he's the chief jurisprudence, doctrinal faith leader within Al-Qaeda, was assassinated by the United States. Now, from what I understand, that is because they were in opposition to the invasion or intervention in Lebanon, unless assurances were given to Turkey that Turkey would have the sphere of influence that it's been working towards in northern Lebanon, which includes the port of Tripoli and the Eastern Mediterranean maritime corridor. That, of course, Israel is going to be opposed to, right? So we have, again, the same scenario that we had in Syria, but Jolani needs the Turkish-influenced armed groups to be on board for the intervention. Now, the intervention might include an actual invasion of Lebanese territory. What it also might include is the creation of a buffer zone again on the border, because those mountain ranges are where Hezbollah develops and manufactures and stores the majority of its missiles deep underground. And Israel has been unable to destroy those underground centers and production facilities, right? What they need is for a ground force, not Israeli, because they can't extend much further, but for Jolani to provide the ground force, which will take control of those mountainous areas and enable the Israelis to enter and destroy those facilities. Because without that destruction, Hezbollah is never going to be defeated. Now, what I'm understanding is that if Jolani is pushed towards this intervention, that will then trigger a reaction from Iran, because the defense of Lebanon is part of their MOU. And so there's potential then that Iran will enter the war against Syria. And there's also potential that the Iraqi resistance, they've already put out various statements saying that if Jolani dares to intervene inside Lebanon, they will attack from Iraq with the 70,000 estimated Syrian Arab Army soldiers that went to Iraq in December 2024. Equally, in Lebanon, there's around 30,000 Syrian army soldiers who came also in December 2024 and who are now, from what I understand, gathered in the Bekaa, so on that eastern border, ready to repel any military operation by Jolani and his forces. The fact that the Ukrainians are there, I mean, I think you remember at the time of Jolani building up in Idlib for the attack on Aleppo, Ukrainians entered Idlib at that point. They were providing drone technology and drones, particularly FPV drones, to basically combat Hezbollah's use of FPV drones, which have been very successful against the Zionists, to provide special forces backup, but also at the same time, again, to siphon some of the foreign mercenaries that Jolani wants to get rid of anyway, into Ukraine to fight Russia. There's also potential of an attack on Haimamim, on the Russian base, because many of the armed groups are sort of saying to Jolani, well, hold on, like, why are we going to attack Lebanon? First of all, we should destroy Russia because Russia was the one bombing us from 2015 until 2024, right? So it's a very shifting landscape of this operation. But the fact that Jolani is going to the NATO summit in Ankara, I think on the 7th of July, is for me very telling. He's not going to be speaking. He'll be having sideline talks. Is he going to persuade Erdogan to basically take part in the operation? Is he going to give assurances to Turkey that they will be given some kind of guarantees in the north of Lebanon? You know what I mean? So yeah. I think if there is going to be military operations from Syria against Lebanon, I think we're looking probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. That's my reading of it, because we've got, we had a shura on the Shia Muslim commemoration of the martyrdom of Hussein on Friday. We've then got the funeral of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in Iran, allegedly on the 4th of July, if that goes ahead, because again, things are escalating between the US and Iran. You've got July 4th in the US. Of course, Trump needs to be seen to have a victory at that point, you know, for the celebrations in the US. There's multiple things playing here. There's also been a statement from Ansarullah in the resistance in Yemen, very strong statement saying, okay, we've had enough. There's not going to be any more Saudi influence in Yemen. We don't accept. Yeah, we don't accept it at all. Yemen will be one country and we will be united behind one government, right? Now, Saudi, from what I understand, is not approving of Jolani's intervention. It's being sponsored basically by Kuwait and UAE, who are the main agents for Israel in the region. Saudi Arabia is kind of backing off. And I think that's because they know if this happens, the potential is that Yemen will invade Saudi Arabia. So what we're sort of heading towards at the moment is a major escalatory ground war, which is going to bring many more players into it. It has the potential, of course, in the opinion of most of the resistance analysts here, of turning the tide against Jolani in Syria fully, and potentially liberating Syria, which is now also a pressure cooker anyway, because Jolani is not only carrying out assassinations, abductions, general insecurity in the country against the minorities that were targeted from the beginning, but even the moderate Sunni population, which is the majority, are now starting to say, okay, like, this is too much. We've had enough. And so he's really sitting on a pressure cooker. So at any moment, any one of these valves could blow. And then basically he's facing either the extremist Takfiris who are against his pivot to the West and his moderation, his pragmatism, his clear normalization with Israel, although he hasn't signed any kind of MOU on that. It's very clear that he has normalized relations with Israel. So yeah, we're at a very precarious stage, basically.
What's interesting is you mentioned 4th of July, because I forgot that that's coming up. And I'm in the US now, and yeah, it's gonna be obnoxious, but I that is something to look at in terms of what the United States is gonna do. JD Vance said that they signed the agreements, they signed the MOU. If Iran doesn't want to play by the rules and respect that, then that's on them. And so it's so infuriating to see everything play out the way it's playing out. Because you can see how the United States is saying, well, we signed it, and you don't want to follow through. It's so nefarious, and this is why I think I was so angry when people were just praising JD Vance's dismissiveness of Israel. When people were hailing him, you have people like Tucker Carlson. And the reason I'm talking about this is it's because it's important in the context of what the United States is actually doing versus what they're displaying they're doing. And we know that Donald Trump is a showman, right? He's not somebody that likes to just stay quiet. He goes big on a lot of things, but a lot of what he says is just exaggerated. And it changes. And a lot of people still pay attention to the rhetoric against Israel, or some sort of, like slapping on the wrist of Israel, when in reality, we have seen, and this is very apparent with what you're mentioning about ICE in Lebanon, because we have seen the merger of Palantir into our structures. And of course, as I've said before on other shows, Peter Thiel is the one that created JD Vance from where he was, which was actually a more liberal stance, a more democratic stance, took him towards the conservatives, created him, restructured him a little bit as a more faithful, religious Christian type of character, and sold him to the public as a more moderate, understanding version of a Trumpian character that could definitely be more rationed and talked with, rather than Donald Trump. And so that's what they were selling him, not just to the American public, but to foreign governments, to Russia, to Iran, to pretty much anybody that the United States has had conflict with. And he's out there. They're kind of selling this idea of the Americans being victims of Israel, or being hesitant, or not really wanting Israel to do what it's doing. But we can't control Israel. Israel does what it wants, so they're not going to abide by this. We're just poor little Washington. We can't do anything, which is absolutely ludicrous when you look at the policies and legislation happening in the background that are making it easier for Israel to be a part of the government of the United States. Basically, the defense structures are entirely merged, and you have the surveillance structures
and the intelligence structures now through Tom Cotton.
So in that sense, how can you say that also the money hasn't stopped flowing into Israel, right? So the money is directly occurring, and the MOU, as you said before, it's non-binding. There's not anything that is going to keep that. But even if it was a legally binding document, when has the United States ever respected this? I mean, this is not just Israel that doesn't respect
Israel.
treaties.
Yeah, exactly.
It's both. I mean, we can look at Minsk, the Minsk Accords that they didn't respect with Russia. And this is why, again, when you talk about Russia's role in the region, it's also important to note that Russia is in a very vulnerable position right now, begging the United States for lifting of sanctions constantly. Moscow being attacked. Moscow, which was a red line that they said that if Ukraine attacked Moscow, they were going to be dealt with. And they haven't really been dealt with. We have seen backlash against Kiev, but not at the level that it should be, especially for people in Moscow being killed now. We're seeing fatalities. We're seeing the energy structures being attacked. And we're still seeing this denial from some analysts that Putin's popularity has sunk, because it has absolutely sunk. Ask any Russian. And I beg of you, please don't just look at people from Russian state media, because they're not just going to be able to give the full reality of the situation. You have to look at the Russian population as a whole. You can go on Telegram, on Russian forums, and see how people are responding to this. And now you add that after everything that Russia's done to appease the United States, because Lavrov just said, oh, well, the Alaska talks, it would be unfortunate if they were just an excuse for Kiev to continue arming itself. Well, I mean, what has happened this entire year and a half since those talks began in 2025? I believe it was like February of 2025, when they were having these talks through Istanbul and in other parts and in different meetings throughout with Kirill Dmitriev and Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Nothing has really gone Russia's way. And instead, things have worsened for Russia militarily, domestically, interiorly, and foreign policy-wise. And now you add on the vulnerability in the region that they had an upper hand in Syria. And despite the fact that they welcomed Giuliani, they were like the first to welcome Giuliani with open arms immediately. Despite all of that, I guess I'm looking at Russia as being in a position between a rock and a hard place, because they are not really forming an alliance that is strong enough in any sort of defense sector with anybody other than Korea, right? Iran, that doesn't exist with Israel in the middle. They haven't made this decision, and I think we've talked about this before. They have this relationship with Israel that they haven't let go of. That's also embedded within their own structures. So how is this going to serve them? They also have that type of relationship with Turkey where there's a give and take, but honestly, they've become more vulnerable. And even with China, the relationship with China is not an even one. I've mentioned before, they're very, very dependent on China when it comes to supplies, in spite of the fact that they give China oil. But I mean, they're not an equal to China. So I do think they're also going to be pushed out, and they're also going to be placed on in a position where there will be more attempts to balkanize them, and they won't be able to stop it if they have both a population that's angry internally, and also the vulnerabilities outside that are occurring. And more people are speaking out about the numbers of dead Russian soldiers that are a lot more than are being given, and also the amount of just disapproval of Putin right now that has gone up like never before. So
and I think, if you look at the Syrian situation, I mean, I actually kind of emailed John Helmer about it today. I said, do you think, Putin now rues the day that they effectively abandoned and betrayed, in my opinion. I found out again very recently in the last few days that when Iran actually tried to supply two air defense systems, because the S-300s, again, I just found out that they were kept at Haifa. They weren't even deployed anywhere in Syria. So it wasn't just a question of Syrian personnel not being trained on how to use them. They were never actually put out to, in the field to be used against Israeli airstrikes or Israeli warplanes. The two air defense that Iran supplied, one, Putin was opposed to it in defense of Israeli national security, of course. And then I was told, obviously, there is absolutely no way that I can confirm this, that there's no document that tells me that is what Russia did, but the source is extremely reliable. And they basically told me, no, when the Iranian air defense arrived, it was Russia that gave the coordinates to Israel, and they were destroyed very shortly after arrival. Now, I would not personally be surprised on this, because in Syria, Russia was very much more actually aligned with Israel than it was with the government of Bashar al-Assad, and definitely more than it was aligned with Iranian influence in Syria. We've talked about this before. The fact that it stood down, it didn't provide any air defense to prevent the assassination of Iranian military advisors and diplomats inside Syria when they were assassinated by Israel. And now the fact that even previously Ukraine was building up in Idlib, and this is something that I could never understand, is like, how on earth can Russia be fighting a war against Ukraine, in Ukraine, and then watch Ukraine enter Idlib, northwest Syria, which was effectively under the deconfliction agreement made by Iran, Turkey, and Russia, but it was Russia and Turkey that were patrolling it and controlling it, allegedly. And there is no way on this planet that Russian surveillance didn't know that Ukraine was in Idlib training Jolani and providing equipment, providing drones, providing specialized equipment, and so on. And yet, then the rest is history as to what happened. Now, again, after Zelensky's visit to Jolani back in beginning of April, we're seeing Ukrainian forces back in Syria in direct conflict with the Russian presence there. And yet we're not hearing anything, right? Is Russia saying anything publicly? I don't think so. I haven't seen anything. So again, it's slipping through their fingers, and yet they don't seem capable of doing anything about it. Of course, from a geopolitical perspective, they're no longer an ally of the sitting government. They don't have the power to act in Syria that they had previously, right? They're effectively a little kind of rump base, right? Stuck out on the coast and surrounded by Takfiris that would quite happily do away with them. And now Ukrainian forces power multiplying those Takfiri forces again. So they're in a very isolated position there. But I keep asking this question and I don't seem to get any answers. How on earth are Ukrainian drones able to reach 1,500 kilometers inside Russian territory or reach Moscow without any air defense interception? And yet we're supposed to believe that Russia is supplying air defense to Iran, which we know is not true from the analysis of Iranians, military experts there, right? No one seems able to answer this. I don't understand where Russia's so-called air defense protection is at this stage, or the capital city, their oil refineries, their oil infrastructure, their energy infrastructure is getting targeted by these drones, and they appear to be incapable of bringing them down. I mean, they're drones. They're not war jets. They're not ballistic missiles. So I'm
incapable or unwilling.
I don't know if there's anyone out there that has any viable theory on that, then please let me know. But I've asked a number of people and I just don't seem to get any what I consider to be substantial response on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's been several theories as to one of the reasons is because Russia cannot. They're down on men. They're down on resources. Yeah. That they literally have built up this idea, which has been pushed by a lot of Western pro-Russia commentators, that Russia's winning, Russia's perfect, this is great, they're defeating NATO, blah blah blah. But that doesn't match what we're seeing in real time. If Russia's not acting towards Ukraine in the way that it should be, it should have. Like I said 2 years ago in 2024, we could have said that Russia was winning. We could say that Russia was actually at the top and was able to end that war. But there wasn't a push to actually do that. There's been this sort of like inching and elongating it and inching and elongating it. And people have died and people are tired of the war. So now it's like if they don't have the resources, if they don't have the capacity to do it, that it's very, very bad. But they're not admitting to it. nobody's talking about it, right? So it could be that. It could also be that they are unwilling to do that, to do an actual immediate reaction towards Ukraine and NATO, as they had said, because all of these weapons and all of these intelligence that is being used to target Russia is coming from NATO. So if they were actually going to attack the root problem, they would have to go and attack Europe, essentially. And I think they're hesitant to do that because they know that that's exactly what NATO wants in an effort to then be able to fully attack Russia. So they are like stuck, in my opinion. I think they are stuck between that decision of fully going head to head with NATO, fully, and the United States by default, or trying to find a solution via negotiations. The problem is they no longer have the upper hand in negotiations because too much time has passed. And now they have to sit there and try to negotiate with Donald Trump and via Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner and trust on Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill Dmitriev is the one that's been leading these negotiations, that's been pushing for this normalization with the United States. But they've been given the short end of the stick. They haven't been given what they want, or they would have said, okay, they're going to have to either accept a shitty deal, for lack of a better term, where they lose some of the ground that they've gained in. And if they don't accept that, then they're going to have to fight. But what they can't do is what they're doing now, which is absolutely nothing. So that there has to be a decision that they have to make. And I feel like there's a lot of fear. And just like we saw with Bashar al-Assad, I think Putin is surrounded by people who are not giving him the full scope of what is actually happening, because he is a leader in wartime. And I think initially he was fine being a leader during not wartime, but during wartime, that changes things. And the people he has around him, I think, are not really focused in on what needs to be done, or they're pushing fear on him because there's so many talks in Western media about Putin. There being fears of coup and all of that. And of course, and from the Russian standpoint, this is all fake news, that there's no such thing as a coup happening. Of course, it's not going to happen like blatantly. But what is true is that there is this fear building up about Putin being removed. This has always been the fear for decades now, right? In regard to Putin, how long he's been in power. And so all of this is surrounding him and surrounding Russia. And meanwhile, all you're getting is the PR, the little PR that Russia is doing is Ukraine lies, Ukraine, the US and Ukraine lies, especially this push towards attacking the EU and their stupidity and their anti-Russia narrative and the Russophobia, all of that. Sure, we all know that. We know that they're lying. We know that they've lied about this conflict. We know that they're terrible. What exactly is being done, though, right? I think I'm sick of hearing like, oh yeah, NATO and the collective West are terrible. They lie. There's all these elites. We know. We're with you on this. But what exactly is Russia doing? And like, what has been gained from this, other than repeating these same things that we know? And that's the analysis that we're getting. And frankly, it's doing a disservice, not just to people, the audience, but to Russia. Because Russia needs to hear what exactly what time it is with the United States. They're not going to get a deal that they benefit from. And this is the issue that I keep running into with Russia, is like they still think that with this administration, they can somehow work something better than with the Biden administration. Well, you have less than 2 years left now. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Because this is not a done deal. That you can finagle a deal right now, but in comes the next administration. Believe me, they're going to continue pushing until balkanization, until a regime change, until something. It's really, really. I think Russia has actually effectively lost, and I don't want to say that in a very, I guess, a permanent sense, but I do think it's going to be hard to get out of this, because if I'm looking at a chessboard and I'm looking at not the move immediately right now, but the moves coming after that Washington and NATO have, I don't see how Russia gets out of this. I don't see it.
Yeah, and I think, the primary reason, going back to Syria, that they kept their bases in Syria on the coast is that it's their launch pad into Africa.
Yeah.
So if, again, through Ukrainian pressure, and of course Ukrainian means NATO, as we keep saying, in Syria, they lose that foothold in Syria, then they've lost their main pathway into Africa, and they would then presumably become more dependent again on Turkey, a Turkey that is also under pressure because Israel sees Turkey as a threat to its own expansionist policies. And if we look at Zionist expansion into Europe, into Albania, Serbia, Slovenia, Hungary, Greece, Cyprus, effectively Turkey is being encircled. And then if you go to Azerbaijan and Armenia and the South Caucasus, which again is a threat to Russia. So I don't know, it's almost like, please wake up, Russia, and actually see what's happening. Because while you're playing or, dancing the negotiation dance, the rug is getting pulled out from under your feet, and this is, I don't know, it's something that traditionally they just kind of never seem to learn,
Yeah. No, I agree. Oh man.
Anyway,
and
let's move to Latin America. I don't know if you've got any news on,
God.
I don't know, the earthquake in Venezuela just seems like,
I honestly, I put on my conspiracy hat with this because it's just, it's just so odd, the timing of this. But at the same time, it wasn't just in Venezuela. That day there was earthquakes in California and in Japan, but Venezuela. So if you all haven't heard, I think pretty much everybody has heard, Venezuela experienced back-to-back earthquakes within 45 seconds of each other. The first one was 7.2, the other one was 7.5 on the Richter scale. And it hit Caracas, but mainly La Guaira, which is north of Caracas. It's in the coastal region of Venezuela, and the death toll has climbed to 1,430, which is going to continue to soar because there's so many people missing. The amount of people that are injured is in the thousands as well. And so it is devastating that this happened to Venezuela shortly after everything that's happened in Venezuela, which was the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife, and the bombing of Venezuela, and still the sanctions remain. And what I want to say about Venezuela right now is that Marco Rubio, who has been a huge, staunch opponent of Maduro and also a major player in pushing for regime change and pushing for the destruction of Venezuela, was one of the first people to send condolences and send his heartfelt support. But immediately what he did was he went and said, we have our military and our organizations ready to deploy, and they have deployed already. And by those organizations, I'm talking about the CIA cutout, USAID, and also the Southern Command, which is the military regime change imperial arm of the United States that is used in Latin America for the purposes of ousting governments and controlling them. And so he sent those two forces to Venezuela immediately. And yes, that's them taking advantage of the situation, but how perfect is that for them? I can't get that out of my head. It's just too perfect for them. We do know that fracking causes earthquakes, so there's that. I don't have any proof to say that this was done on purpose, but it's just, we live in either in such a dark world or something like this happens to people that are already under sanctions, which by the way haven't been lifted yet. They're sending all this aid and all of this help, but the sanctions that have kept Venezuelans from having the infrastructure to deal with a catastrophe of this nature have not been lifted. So don't let them get away with this idea that they're helping. If they wanted to really, really help, they would eliminate the sanctions. They would have done that a long time ago, but at least they would do it now, and they haven't done that. And so a lot of the buildings and the infrastructure in Venezuela wasn't kept up, and they don't have the material, so they did need help from all over the world. Of course, everybody in the world has sent. I know Mexico sent forces, even El Salvador sent forces, Colombia, everybody reached out and has helped. But the help from the United States, and by the way, Israel also gave solidarity, sending. They're willing to send forces. It's just watching them take advantage of this situation, I think, has been just wow. Yeah. I just wanted to start with that.
And then what else is going on? Because Latin America, I see very much as elsewhere. I mean, we haven't kind of fully covered the Zionist expansion into Europe, but I mean, perhaps we can do that next time. But let's talk about what's going on with the various elections and the heading towards fascist Zionist regimes.
Yeah, so so that's Venezuela. Unfortunately, that's what's happened. But the other devastating things that are happening in Latin America are these elections that, in the opinion of many of us who have studied elections and were in these countries and have been in these countries, are basically were stolen in favor of the far right in Latin America, which is basically the United States backed and Israeli backed forces. So let's start with Colombia. Colombia had their final election this past Sunday, and there were allegations of fraud, not just from different people, but from the Colombian president himself, Gustavo Petro, who is the incumbent president. And he specifically said that the only people in the world that had the capacity to interfere in these elections electronically were Israel. And he accused Israel of interfering in these elections. And the far-right candidate has emerged as the victor. His name is Abelardo de Espriella, and he went against left-winger Ivan Cepeda. This election was determined by less than 1%, which is a statistical tie. And it's within a margin of error. So technically, a lot of people have been telling me they're very disappointed that Ivan Cepeda did recognize these results eventually, because they said there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still a lot. This isn't like a done deal. But once the candidate said he accepts the results, it effectively does make the Abelardo de la Espriella the winner. And one of the first things he did was go on social media and publicly say that he supports Israel as the people that are supporters of God and Christianity. And he's already, I mean, immediately, that's like the first thing he did. And not only is this guy a similar type to Bukele, yes, not only is he a guy who tortured and killed cats, but he has already put out his allegiance to the Isaac Accords, to Israel. And he is very much chosen and endorsed by Donald Trump and all of the Trump administration, which in and of itself shouldn't have ever happened. You shouldn't have a sitting U.S. president advocate for Colombians to elect somebody, in this way. And one of the things he's leading with is the attack on drug and cartels and all of this drug cartel terrorism in Colombia, which has significantly gone down during Petro's presidency, where he made some inroads and he was able to create a unified bloc to kind of bring the country together. Well, now we're going to go back towards that sort of paramilitary structure that basically the outcome is a lot of blood, a lot of violence in the streets, a lot of repression. That's what this guy's going to bring in, because that's his focus, right? And there was a what they call proceso de escrutinio in Colombia, but which is basically what you call an audit type of process, that they were supposed to be reviewing it, and it was kind of done, but it wasn't fully done in the way Gustavo Petro wanted it to be done. And then, of course, they gave up on that. And one of the things that Petro alleged in regards to Israel was they have this, and hear this out because this is interesting. So Colombia has this, the owners of their electoral system are Thomas Gregg and Sons, the ones in charge of these machines, and the Batista brothers are the owners of the Thomas Gregg and Sons, and that is at the center of the potential electoral scheme. He alleged that these irregularities that involve the total the vote tally sheets, because in every sort of table you have a total of how many people voted and stuff. So those are considered the tally sheets in Colombia. They're under the form E14. And so that data is collected and then sent to a central database. And then that's how they do a quick count. And then they do the final count. And so before that data was even sent out, it was sent to the United States, and everybody was wondering why that was the case. It was sent to the State Department. It was sent to Marco Rubio. And so the United States did their own count and exerted pressure on the Colombian authorities. This is what Gustavo Petro has said. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that Peru now did the same thing. In Peru, that is exactly what happened. There were reports from people that worked in the Peruvian embassy and in the US embassy in Peru. There were reports to media that Marco Rubio received the tally sheets immediately after the election was done with a quick count. And the quick count said that Roberto Sanchez was going to best Keiko Fujimori, the US-backed candidate. And that quick count was given to the State Department via the American ambassador to Peru, Bernie Moreno is his name. And so there was these leaks and these whistleblowers that came out and said they received those numbers, and they sent back numbers, and they said, if your results are not this, then you will have problems with us. And so what happened after was there was this slow process that's taken like a month to count. We don't still have officially a winner in Peru. Let me just say that, because they're still counting 0.000 of this stuff. But effectively, based on the numbers that they're giving us, it would be impossible for Roberto Sanchez to catch up to Keiko Fujimori unless they overturn something, some of the things he has been asking for, recounts, them to take into account some of the canceled tables that benefited him, right? So some of the areas that benefited him were annulled. It's a lot of these things that happened, and they were caught as they were happening, but then they were kind of just pushed aside. And you had this very slow count, which gives the people in power time and the ability to finagle the numbers. And so now it does seem like Keiko Fujimori will be the victor, and she is absolutely despised by Peruvians. So I have no idea how she won, other than what we're talking about. And the foreign intervention, and they're saying, oh, the numbers from the diaspora in the United States favor her. Well, of course they do. Of course they do. That's a given. But do they favor her that much for this to have been the outcome? It really didn't seem like it. And I have to say, I did vote in these elections for the first time ever in my life. And I did vote in favor of Roberto Sanchez. But when I went in there, I wanted to film. And in Peru, you can film. In the United States, they didn't let me film. Even with the press pass, they were like, you're not allowed to film, which is false. You are allowed to film. I managed to film from the outside, but it felt off. It felt odd. It felt like they were like kind of looking to see what I was doing and who I was and all the stuff. And I honestly, you can control a lot of things internally in the country if you have people on the ground, if you have all of this, but there's no way they were going to be able to control what was going on in the United States or in other places, but especially in the United States. I have no idea how they would do that count. Normally in Peru, you can view the count, you can view everything. Like I was able to do that before when I was in Peru during the first round. I couldn't do that here. So I don't know what they did it behind closed doors. I don't know what was done behind closed doors. And so what does this look like? Well, it looks like Israel has captured pretty much every country in Latin America, Israel and Washington, the United States of Epstein. And I don't have the map with me right now, but it is that tweet where it's everything is now with an Israeli US flag. And the only country that's left and hanging by a thread, because Lula, nobody really trusts him anymore, or anyway. But he has an election in October against Bolsonaro's son. And Bolsonaro's son and Bolsonaro family as a whole are extremely Zionist. But I mean, that's it. Other than that, pretty much everybody is captured. And that is the devastating part out of all of this. It's like, you have tangible allegations of election interference. Why does Marco Rubio get to see the electoral process, the documents of these countries? And then you have public election interference via Trump. And then you have the on the ground things that have been documented happening. And now you have just the takeover of that. And we know that this is a buildup of the United States takeover of the Americas. And, you can talk about the Shield of the Americas, but also the Isaac Accords coming here to fruition. I've been talking about this for months. And unfortunately, this is where we're at. It has not emerged as a victory. You have Bolivians in Bolivia still fighting against our government. But what does that do? It creates this civil strife where the United States can come in. Peru has already said, the indigenous people of Peru has said, we will not accept this victory. Roberto Sanchez, the candidate, has said, I will not accept this victory. There's too much here that isn't right. So he refuses to accept the victory. So it's not a done deal in that regard. But what does that do? It's going to cause mass protest to unleash all over the country. And then the military is going to come in, right? And the military is now backed by the United States via F-16s and Blackhawks. So the United States already have that in play. So now we can see all the pieces that they were manipulating in Peru and why the reason for that is. Because people don't like Keiko. They very much don't want another Fujimorismo, a dictatorship into the country. And one of the things that I said in a recent interview, I think with Indy and the people, the independent media network, is I said, a lot of people don't talk about this part of Peru, but one of the things the United States did was fund the radical, this group, a Maoist group called Shining Path. They funded them. They instilled directions on them to create a sort of civil war between the left coalitions in Peru, which ended up in a destruction of the entire country. And then they called in the CIA and Fujimori and his right-hand man, Vladimir Montesinos, to repress that and crush it and say that it was the communists and the left that were causing this problem. And this is one of the reasons why Peruvians are so anti-left and anti-communist and anti-socialist, because that they associate that violence that happened during the 80s and 90s with anything remotely left. but that generation is dying, and the younger generations are learning. So there's hope in that. But right now, it's honestly just very dark what's happened in Latin America. I feel like it's being stolen, and yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the glimmer of hope, because when I was looking at the Israeli expansion, particularly through Jared Kushner into Albania, Serbia, most of Europe, to be honest, certainly most of the Balkans. But there was one episode in an area called, or a town called Salento in the heel of Italy, where there was this real estate agency that was established actually by an Israeli. And they started trying to establish effectively Israeli settlement there. And there was massive pushback by the population that put enormous pressure on the local government. And it was prevented. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to come back and have another go, or that they're not going to then just get rid of the I don't know what you call him, the mayor or the governor of that particular region, and bring in another one that is then going to give permission for Israeli property and land purchase. And by the way, I also heard today that Jelani is quietly doing away with all the obstacles for Jews to buy property and land in Syria. Jolani's quietly getting rid of that. And there are actual increased visits or kind of tours being made by Israelis into Damascus, because Jews were living in the old city of Damascus. In fact, when they left, most of those houses were then rented by Palestinians who were driven out of Palestine, is the irony on this. So there's also a move to eradicate those obstacles in Syria for Israelis to come in and purchase property and land there, which had been completely screened and firewalled by Bashar al-Assad's government previously, right? And so I think the model that we're seeing in Latin America, which is this forcing through of governments that are going to be Zionist aligned at the same time as the US is effectively merging its military, its intelligence, its surveillance with Israel. That seems to be the pattern. And I think we're going to be seeing that pattern. I mean, even in Hungary, I mean, Orban was actually already pro-Zionist, but the new government is just it's off the scale pro-Israel. I mean, that was almost the first statement that they made once they were elected, right? Yeah. And we know that Orban, to a degree, was against the war against Russia from what I remember. So there were elements of Orban. We're also seeing Meloni now come under attack in Italy because of her recent criticism of Trump. All of a sudden, it's been released that I think 500 flights took off from Italy as part of the aggression against Iran. She's denying it, but this is putting her. So it's to me, it's just like Trump's role is literally to remove any opposition to US supremacy, but US supremacy now has to be absolutely tied to Israel's and the Zionist movement, or the Christian Zionist combined movement.
And that's what it is. And I think that's why I think the danger of Russia trying to push that alignment, because that's effectively what it will be. It's not going to be a Russian Orthodox type of alignment. It would be absorbed into this Christian Zionism. That's what it is. And the other thing, unfortunately, in Latin America is that even Central America is gone, except Nicaragua. Nicaragua has been quiet. I haven't heard anything from Nicaragua. And they
No, I
have a
haven't.
very aging leader in Daniel Ortega. He is up there in age. So that is a vulnerability that they have. Their election is next year, and they would be the last one left after Brazil. Mexico has been keeping up and doing fairly okay comparatively to the rest of the entire Latin American region, but they're also in a vulnerable position if everybody else goes. And we know that their economy is intrinsically linked to the United States. So the United States wouldn't hesitate to deal with it that way. And Cuba also has is being economically waged, meaning that they're obviously starved Cubans out of oil, out of energy, out of everything via the 60-plus-year blockade and the sanctions. But Cuba has now made an effort to open up their markets and allow more privatization of their markets and bringing in capitalism, which to some people, okay, well, this is a good thing. The problem is the United States is going to come in with that. The United States comes in this way, and they are going to be the ones with the capital and the money, and not just the United States, but Zionist entities to basically do what they want with the island. And Cuba cannot fight militarily against the United States. It would be a bloodbath. It would be absolutely, so people are like, well, Cuba can do this and that. What can they do? It would have been a great opportunity for Russia to actually, or China to actually establish some sort of something in Cuba. That would have been like that would have been a possibility that would have been done decades ago. But they didn't do that, and there hasn't been any sort of alliance that has been effective in maintaining sovereignty of these governments in a way that, for example, NATO achieved. So where we're at right now is the United States is capturing all of these countries one by one, and this is why for me it's hard to hear when people say the United States is losing when everything that I'm looking at is I'm sorry,
exactly.
in that way, they're not losing. I think they're losing patience. They're losing credibility in the world, but so is Israel, and they're still taking.
Yeah, but it's largely irrelevant, because at the end of the day, people talk all the time about, but everyone sees what the Zionist entity is now. It's a genocidal entity stuffed full of genuine psychopaths. And who's actually standing up to it? Iran and the resistance. And that's it. That's it. Right. So, that's the point. They now realize that nobody's actually going to do anything to stop them, so they can effectively do what they want. Now, are they overextending on multiple levels? Yes, of course they are. Mm-hmm. But, at the same time, other than Iran, other than the resistance in this region, I don't actually see much sign of. And even if we look at the UK government, I mean, they just got rid of Keir Starmer, but Burnham, the guy they brought in, is hardcore Zionist. He's even, Starmer was a bit kind of limp, lame, pro-Zionist, right? He Tony Blair's protege. He basically took on Tony Blair's security advisor, Jonathan Powell, and Jonathan Powell was the guy who established Intermediate, MI6 outreach organization that ended up grooming Jolani for his role now as the trigger for whatever the West want him to do in Syria. But Starmer's gone. But what's happened? We've brought in an even more hardline pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist. So it's clear the direction that we're heading in. And unfortunately, if I look at the UK, the population is just being consumed by sectarian narratives against migrants, right? And people like Tommy Robinson are being given airtime and a platform and supported by Kirill Dmitriev from Russian perspective. And so I don't know, it's like we're just seeing that entire neo-colonialist project rolled out everywhere right now. And people are so weakened by austerity, by varying degrees of poverty and disenfranchisement and living under totalitarian states, really, at the end of the day. And those are now being converted into far right-wing fascist states that are fully aligned with Zionism.
And with the UK, I just want to say, people were cheerleading the removal of Keir Starmer just in a way that was like, oh, this is so great. We're getting rid of the, globalist. And it's like, what are you talking about? You're not getting rid of anything. You're just putting a different guy, and you're just cheering because you somehow picked up this idea that the problems are all the migrants, not where the migrants are coming from, because the reasons why the migrants are coming into these countries. Like, it's just like people's brains have been removed. It's so easy to cause this. And this is exactly, it works to their favor, because with the sectarianism and the xenophobia and all of that, they can just have people focused in on each other and and then just switch little puppets and continue doing the same foreign policy. I can't believe, and it's not just, by the way, the people that listen to these things. It's a lot of the independent media commentary is very much pushing this narrative. I'm not just talking about Tommy Robinson. I'm talking about others like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, the Russian commentators, or the pro-Russian commentators, the American patriots, sort of that are constantly talking about, the migrants and this and that. And like, I see it in a lot of like these groups, Telegram groups, where the way they speak about this is like, it's good Keir Starmer's out. He's going to rein in and make, Europe for the Europeans. It's like, white people are now victims, and we need to stand together. And it's this weird, like, almost like anti-establishment merger with the far right is happening. I know. That is kind of confusing and weird. And like, it's just literally, this is what they want. They want people to like be confused and chaotic and not really just look at what's actually happening. And very few people are speaking out against that. And I'm sure you've run into it at a UK column, because I'll see it where some of the people even that follow my channel are like, but the migrants and this and that. I'm like, but wait a minute, like, do you know actually what's going on? Like, wait,
I know. It's I don't know. I mean, I when you look at what's happened in this region, particularly Syria, which was a secular, fully united, cohesive society, and now look at it. Look at what the West brings in. It's now a sectarian hell. And that's what they're now bringing into Western societies. And it just terrifies me that people are kind of falling for it, and they're falling for hatred. They're falling for racism. They're falling for, white supremacism. And they don't see it. So while they're talking about it not being a good thing in Palestine, or even to some degree in Syria, no, but you're actually joining forces with the very entities and individuals and organizations and governments and regimes, etc., that support the genocidal entity in this region. I don't know how you this is just an endless conversation between me and a number of people, is how do you how do you deal with this? How do you get through to people that, here Hezbollah has always had a policy: don't go on the streets, don't protest, don't feed the civil strife. But I don't know how long they can sustain that, because people have lost so much. I mean, what was it? Ridiculous number of buildings have been fully destroyed. Something like, I think it's more than 11 million. Insane amount of millions of cubic meters of rubble in the south. The deaths of ambulance workers, paramedics, doctors, university professors. I mean, it's just like Gaza all over again. And yet people are supposed to accept a deal with the entity that has just been genociding them in the south, So I don't even think And that's the point, is people need to understand that they're going to be pushed to the limit, absolutely to the limit of their own ability to deal with what they're going to be saturated with, from a propaganda level, from a physical austerity level, from a, it's and honestly, even me, I'm struggling to understand how people are going to deal with it, honestly. And I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I do see pockets of resistance, obviously, here, yes. And I just hope that those pockets of awareness, when I see a lot of the young people in Palestine Action, for example, then that really does give me a huge degree of hope. And I was watching a young Canadian the other day who took on the fact that Israel is training the police in Edmonton. And she's now really coming under attack because she raised the question, and she said, why are Edmonton police forces being now trained by the genocidal entity? So I do think there's a lot of hope from within. I never know what they are, Gen X or whatever they are.
Z,
Yeah,
Gen Z.
okay. That.
Come on, boomer.
I'm too much of a boomer. Yeah, I know. I think there is a groundswell of awareness of what's going on from that perspective, and I really just hope it grows and becomes a really coherent, cohesive movement against what is incoming.
I think that's where the light is. It's in pockets that are everywhere. We see them in Bolivia and Peru, in the indigenous areas. We're seeing them throughout Latin America, in Albania, as you said, in the different parts of the world. But the pockets, and together they make more. So, I mean, we just need more pockets and more people to join these pockets, I guess, if we're gonna not be so doom and gloom. We do need that right now, because the world really does need sunlight with everything that's been happening so far. And if all you're going to offer me is the aliens are supposed to invade and we're supposed to see the aliens during the World Cup, I'm waiting for them. I'm here. I'm open. I'm waiting for them to come in and
I'm going to be hitchhiking when they arrive.
Take over Trump's brain. I don't know what you got to do. What you got to do. We're all open to it.
If you can find it. Yeah.
If we're open to regime change of all the U.S. Israeli contingent, but just I got to see it. I got to see it happen, because all it is so far talk. And even something as simple as the World Cup, or as FIFA and everything that they're doing to the Iranian players. I mean, it's ridiculous, the treatment that Iran's receiving. But it's we just have to really put our faith in what the resistance is, and what that means, not just within your region and Lebanon and Iran and West Asia, but also we need to build that mentality, I think, everywhere else. So that's all I have for today. I think we've droned on long enough.
Yeah, we haven't done it for a while, so hopefully it's still acceptable by the audience. Anyway, so, yes, apologies. It wasn't too bad, an hour and 23. That's better than normal.
Yeah. It's good. Vanessa, I guess you got anything coming up before we?
No, not really. I'm going to be doing an investigation into how Jolani has been securing weapons through all sorts of nefarious channels, because, of course, Israel bombed Syria's prior offensive and defensive capability. And people did raise the question. They said, well, how is Jolani going to basically carry out these attacks if he's got no weapons left? But he has. So I'm going to be writing about that. And I just, what are you going to be doing next, Fee? Because I know you've been sort of in orbit to a large degree, traveling around.
Yeah. I'm always in orbit. You know, I had to come to the US, but when I go back to Peru, um, it's going to be a tumultuous time. There's already more military on the ground there. The people aren't going to accept this victory. So if I get a chance, I do want to go to see there's already mass protests in Peru, and there's definitely some in Colombia as well. So there's going to be a lot going on when it comes to that and that sort of thing. I may or may not travel to West Asia. I don't know about that yet, but I'll keep you all informed on the latest. And yeah, we'll see what happens.
And please remember to like and subscribe. We always forget to say that, but I remembered this time.
Yes.
If you like what we do, of course.
Yeah, and if you don't like it, still like it.
Yeah, still like and subscribe.
And if you don't like it and you hate us, it's you don't know what you're doing. So, all right.
Don't say anything.
Well, thanks for tuning in, you guys. We'll see you soon, hopefully sooner rather than later. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.